From insane gladiatorial battles you won't believe to weird delicacies they used to eat. Here are strange things the ancient Romans did.
Are you guys ready for today's American Eye video? We got some crazy stuff coming up, so be sure to stick around.
Number 12. Naumachia. The word naumachia refers to staged naval battles that the ancient Romans would put on for entertainment purposes. The Colosseum was primarily used for gladiatorial fights and could fit an estimated 87,000 people, but the citizens of Rome were starting to get bored of the same things all the time. It would also be the location of some of the most insane spectacles the world would ever see, including beast hunts, athletics, plays, and even occasionally public executions. However, some of the craziest things that took place here were the mock naval battles. These took place in 80 AD when Emperor Titus ordered that the arena be flooded in order to recreate the battle between the Athenians and Syracuse. It required 3,000 men, as well as many replica ships and even an artificial island in the middle. It required a lot of resources, and with so many people in a small area, the arena would literally turn into a giant bloodbath. The people who were forced to fight were typically ones who were criminals and not trained gladiators in this case. Number 11. Striegel. Things might have been a little bit strange back during ancient times at the Roman bathhouses. They took hygiene pretty seriously, and they would use bronze tools known as striegels to clean themselves with. It was typically a curved blade that would be used to scrape off extra sweat or dirt. First, they applied a type of oil onto themselves. Once they were all greased up, they would have a servant use these tools to clean their bodies with. They also seemed to have some kind of symbolic value to them, since many of them were found in tombs. Could these have been used to clean yourself in the afterlife? Number 10. Decimation. Some serious punishments would take place among the Roman legions, but nothing was worse than decimation. It is indeed as brutal as it sounds. In fact, the English word for decimation has its origins from the punishment and literally translates to removal of a tenth. Guilty men in groups of 10 would select from a bunch of sticks, and whoever drew the shortest stick would meet their ultimate fate. It was basically like a lottery that you really didn't want to win. While it might sound like a lot of men at first, if a whole legion of soldiers are guilty, then that means 480 had to be executed. Although the practice didn't happen too often, it would be seen during moments when a large number of soldiers may have been either scattered or retreated against orders. Number 9. Strange delicacies. For the wealthy emperors and leaders of Rome, eating the same old thing got boring after a while, and recipes continued to get stranger over time. As the empire would rule over other territories, they would typically try to eat whatever was living there. Many of us would just consider a flamingo to be a cool bird to look at, but to the Romans, flamingos were a delicious source of protein. One of the most coveted organs was the tongue. They weren't exactly easy to come by either, and they're more likely to have came from Africa at that time. Surprisingly, in modern times, flamingo is becoming a popular dish served in India. Other rich Romans preferred eating the brain. Another one was snails that were only fed milk for a period of time before being cooked. Although the practice of eating camels probably started in Persia, the Roman Emperor Heliogabalus particularly enjoyed eating the camel's heel and not the toes. Number 8. Gladiator Sweat. Gladiators were certainly the rock stars of their time, with many people idolizing them and their courage. Despite the popular belief, they were not always forced to fight to the end and would often be kept alive for future combat. Anything that came from a gladiator was a hot commodity, and their blood and sweat were considered to be powerful aphrodisiacs. The sweat was often used as a beauty treatment. Athletes would often get oiled up before engaging in combat, and it would often be scraped off of them and into a jar where they would collect it. You'd probably imagine that no one would really want to use this concoction of olive oil, dirt, sweat, and dead skin cells, right? Wrong. It was a little bit like an ancient version of Belle Delphine's bathwater in a sense. Number 7. Pass the sponge. While the Romans were fairly concerned with hygiene, they still did a few things that make most people shake their heads in disbelief. We might take the modern invention of toilet paper for granted, or we might freak out a little bit if there wasn't any more left. While the ancient Greeks were used to using the stones, the Romans weren't much better and preferred using the sponge on a stick like we see here. And if you thought that everyone had their own sponge on a stick, think again. They were often shared in public places and only washed off with water before using it again. That's just nasty. Hopefully waiting for a sponge wasn't too long. Number 6. Royal purple. For the Romans, purple was a sign of royalty due to the high price of the dye. As the empire began to get more and more wealthy, a higher demand in luxury materials would take place. This practice would become a worldwide fashion trend, and the Persian king Cyrus adopted a purple tunic as his form of royal uniform. The source of where the dye came from is a little bit weird though. The production of purple dye consisted of the mucus from sea snails, which for some reason was highly sought after. The dye was released as a defense mechanism for the snails and could be repeatedly extracted, or they could simply crush up the snail and get it that way. The emperors of the Eastern Roman Empire would also wear purple, as we see with Emperor Justinian in this photo. The royal color would seemingly hold true into medieval times when it was used by bishops and cardinals. One person claimed it would take 12,000 snails to produce 1.4 grams of dye. Number 5. Hadrian's Walls. The Romans were starting to get a little bit tired of wild British barbarians trying to cross their borders, and eventually, in AD 122, the Roman Emperor Hadrian built this wall. The wall was constructed out of stone, and every 5 Roman miles there'd be a fortress which could be used to garrison infantry and cavalry units. It's considered to be the largest Roman artifact anywhere in the world and runs for a total of 73 miles. The height and width of the walls could measure an average of 10 feet high to 20 feet high and would include various ditches. Many historians would argue that there wasn't a huge threat from the ancient Britons north of the wall, but it was merely a display of power and to solidify land that was conquered. There's even some evidence that would support that the wall was polished and could reflect light as far away as 5 miles. One wall wasn't enough either. They had to build a second wall. Another wall was constructed even further north, known as the Antonine Wall in 142 AD, to secure further land grabbing. Number 4. Caligula's insanity. In just 1400 days as emperor, Caligula would prove to be one of the most insane emperors the world would ever know. He ruled the strongest empire with an iron fist and has been described as sadistic, cruel, ruthless, evil. The names go on. We could really go on all day about the wacky things he did, like declaring war on the god of Neptune. But it's the source of his insanity that's been the biggest mystery psychologists and historians are trying to figure out. Was he born into a life of nefarious evil, or was he just someone who didn't know how to properly handle his power? Stories about sleeping with his sister, declaring himself as a god, practice grimacing in the mirror, declaring a horse as a member of the council and a priest, and other stuff like that just go on. He even threw spectators into the arena with lions. Caligula was known to drink pearls that were dissolved in vinegar too. Caligula also had an epic party boat as well that was discovered in Lake Nemi. There's also a really crazy movie out there on YouTube called Caligula, which could bring to life some of his insanity. Number 3. The Brewing of Rome. About 2 millennia ago, a great fire engulfed Rome that covered much of the city, especially the slums. This was ultimately blamed on the crazy emperor at that time, Nero, and managed to burn for about 6 days. Many claim that Nero had intentionally started this fire in order to be able to rebuild the great city the way he wanted to. Finally, when the fire had subsided, 10 of 14 Roman districts were completely destroyed, as well as the Temple of Jupiter and the Atrium Vestae. This was apparently to make room for a lavish palace. Other historians even go as far as saying that Nero was playing his fiddle while he watched Rome burn from a distance. Other sources claim that Nero was conveniently hiding at his resort in Antium during the fire, which also made him seem more guilty. Number 2. Bring on the bears. If you thought the Romans only threw lions and gladiators into the arena, think again. The Atlas bear was the only known species of bear to inhabit Africa until it became extinct in the 1850s. During the advancement of the Roman Empire into northern Africa, they loved going hunting for these animals for sport and would capture them. When many of the bears were captured, they were brought to the Colosseum or other arenas and watched them battle it out with gladiators. The animals were often starved and made to be extremely hungry before the events were set to take place. This would also make them just a little bit more angry and more likely to attack the gladiator. It's believed that this practice greatly reduced the number of bears left on the continent and would be one factor as to why they went extinct. At number 1, Centurions. There aren't a ton of helmets out there that are quite as iconic as the Roman centurion helmet that was worn by the Centurions. Centurions were the commanders of 100 to 200 soldiers and wore the helmet not just for battle, but also to look cool. The plumes you see at the top of the helmet were often made from horsehair. While it was typically red, it could also be yellow, purple, and black. Centurions could also receive about 17 times the pay as a legionary soldier, and few requirements were needed to receive that kind of pay. They need to be at least 30 years old, serve at least a few years in the military, display excellent physical condition, and know how to read.
Whoa, now that was a crazy American Eye video. Be sure to hit that subscribe button to see more like this.